Hey, squirrels, I got my face on. Woohoo! It's amazing how much better that makes you feel. Whether it looks better or not. Chapter 7, Part 2. The inquest was a purely formal affair. No one came forward to identify the dead woman. Lucy was called to give evidence of finding the body, and medical evidence was given as to the cause of death, strangulation. The proceedings were then adjourned. It was a cold, blustery day when the Crackenthorpe family came out of the hall where the inquest had been held. There were 5 of them all told: Emma, Cedric, Harold, Alfred, and Brian Eastley, the husband of the dead daughter, Edith. There was also Mr. Wimborne, the senior partner of the firm of solicitors who dealt with the Crackenthorpe's legal affairs. He had come down specially from London at great inconvenience to attend the inquest. They all stood for a moment on the pavement, shivering. Quite a crowd had assembled. The piquant? Not sure about that. Let's look it up. No, that. No, not that word. Not that word. Sorry, y'all. Takes me just a minute. Piquant. Having a pleasantly sharp taste or appetizing flavor. Don't think that's it. Pleasantly stimulating or exciting to the mind. That's it. Details of the body in the sarcophagus had been fully reported in both the London and the local press. A murmur went round. That's them. Emma said sharply, let's get away. The big hired Daimler drew up to the curb. Car. Daimler, German. Emma got in and motioned to Lucy. Mr. Wimborne, Cedric, and Harold followed. Brian Eastley said, I'll take Alfred with me in my little bus. The chauffeur shut the door and the Daimler prepared to roll away. Oh, stop, cried Emma. There are the boys. The boys, in spite of aggrieved protest, had been left behind at Rutherford Hall, but they now appeared, grinning from ear to ear. We came on our bicycles, said Stoddard West. The policeman was very kind and led us at the back of the hall. I hope you don't mind, Miss Crackenthorpe, he added politely. She doesn't mind, said Cedric, answering for his sister. You're only young once. Your first inquest, I expect? It was rather disappointing, said Alexander, all over so soon. We can't stay here talking, said Harold irritably. There's quite a crowd, and all those men with cameras. At a sign from him, the chauffeur pulled away from the curb. The boys waved cheerfully. All over so soon, said Cedric. That's what they think, the young innocents. It's just beginning. It's all very unfortunate, most unfortunate, said Harold. I suppose, he looked at Mr. Wimborne, who compressed his thin lips and shook his head with distaste. I hope, he said, sententiously, that the whole matter will soon be cleared up satisfactorily. The police were very efficient. However, the whole thing, as Harold says, has been most unfortunate. He looked, as he spoke, at Lucy, and there was distinct disapproval in his glance. If it had not been for this young woman, his eyes seemed to say, poking about where she had no business to be, none of this would have happened. This statement, or one closely resembling it, was voiced by Harold Crackenthorpe. By the way, Miss Owlsbarrow, just what made you go looking in that sarcophagus? Lucy had already wondered just when this thought would occur to one of the family. She had known that the police would ask it first thing. What surprised her was that it seemed to have occurred to no one else until this moment. Cedric, Emma, Harold, and Mr. Wimborne all looked at her. Her reply, for what it was worth, had naturally been prepared for some time. "Really," she said in a hesitating voice, "I hardly know. I did feel that the whole place needed a thorough clearing out, and cleaning, and there was," she hesitated, "a very peculiar and disagreeable smell." She had counted accurately on the immediate shrinking of everyone from the unpleasantness of this idea. Mr. Wimborne murmured, Yes, of course, about 3 weeks," the police surgeon said. "I think, we must all try and not let our minds dwell on this thing." He smiled encouragingly at Emma, who had turned very pale. "Remember," he said, "this wretched young woman was nothing to do with any of us." "Ah, but you can't be so sure of that, can you?" said Cedric. Lucy Islesborough looked at him with some interest. She had already been intrigued by the rather startling differences between the three brothers. Cedric was a big man with a weather-beaten, rugged face, unkempt dark hair, and a joking manner. He had arrived from the airport unshaven, and though he had shaved in preparation for the inquest, he was still wearing the clothes in which he had arrived, and which seemed to be the only ones he had: old gray flannel trousers and a patched and rather threadbare baggy jacket. He looked the stage bohemian to the life, and proud of it. His brother Harold, on the contrary, was the perfect picture of a city gentleman and a director of important companies. He was tall, with a neat, erect carriage, and had dark hair going slightly bald on the temples, a small black mustache, and was impeccably dressed in a dark, well-cut suit and a pearl gray tie. He looked what he was, a shrewd and successful businessman. He now said stiffly, "Really, Cedric, that seems a most uncalled-for remark." "Don't see why. She was in our barn, after all. What did she come there for?" Mr. Wimborne coughed and said, "Possibly some assassination. I understand that it was a matter of no, not assassination. These words, I should know them. An appointment to meet someone in secret is assignation. Yep, I reckon. I understand that it was a matter of local knowledge that the key was kept outside on a nail." His tone indicated outrage at the carelessness of such procedure. So clearly marked was this that Emma spoke apologetically. "It started during the war. For the ARP wardens, there was a little spirit stove, and they made themselves hot cocoa. Excuse me. And afterwards, since there was really nothing there anybody could have wanted to take, we went on leaving the key hanging up. It was convenient for the Women's Institute people. If we'd kept it in the house, it might have been awkward when there was no one at home to give it them when they wanted it to get the place ready. With only daily women and no resident servants." Her voice trailed away. She had spoken mechanically, given a wordy explanation without interest, as though her mind was elsewhere. Cedric gave her a quick, puzzled glance. "You're worried, sis? What's up?" Harold spoke with exasperation. "Really, Cedric, can you ask?" "Yes, I do ask. Granted, a strange young woman has got herself killed in the barn at Rutherford Hall. Sounds like a Victorian melodrama. And granted, it gave Emma a shock at the time. But Emma's always been a sensible girl. I don't see why she goes on being worried now. Dash it, one gets used to everything." "Murder takes a little more getting used to by some people than it may in your case," said Harold acidly. "I dare say, Murders are two a penny in Majorca and Ibiza, not Majorca. It's the same thing. Not at all. It's quite a different island. Harold went on talking. My point is that, though murder may be an everyday commonplace to you living amongst hot-blooded Latin people, nevertheless in England we take such things seriously, he added with increasing irritation. And really, Cedric, to appear at a public inquest in those clothes? What's wrong with my clothes? They're comfortable. They're unsuitable. Well, anyway, they're the only clothes I've got with me. I didn't pack my wardrobe trunk when I came rushing home to stand in with the family over this business. I'm a painter, and painters like to be comfortable in their clothes. So you're still trying to paint? Look here, Harold. When you say trying to paint, Mr. Wimborne cleared his throat in an authoritative manner. This discussion is unprofitable, he said reprovingly. I hope, my dear Emma, that you will tell me if there is any further way in which I can be of service to you before I return to town. The reproof had its effect. Emma Crackenthorpe said quickly, It was most kind of you to come down. Not at all. It was advisable that someone should be at the inquest to watch the proceedings on behalf of the family. I have arranged for an interview with the inspector at the house. I have no doubt that, distressing as all this has been, the situation will soon be clarified. In my own mind there seems little doubt as to what occurred. As Emma has told us, the key to the long barn was known locally to hang outside the door. It seems highly probable that the place was used in the winter months as a place of assignation, or however you say it, by local couples. No doubt there was a quarrel, and some young man lost control of himself. Horrified at what he had done, his eye lit on the sarcophagus, and he realized that it would make an excellent place of concealment. Lucy thought to herself, yes, it sounds most plausible. That's just what one might think. Cedric said, You say a local couple, but nobody's been able to identify the girl locally. It's early days yet. No doubt we shall get an identification before long, and it is possible, of course, that the man in question was a local resident, but that the girl came from elsewhere, perhaps from some other part of Brackhampton. Brackhampton's a big place. It's grown enormously in the last 20 years. If I were a girl coming to meet my young man, I'd not stand for being taken to a freezing cold barn miles from anywhere. Cedric objected. I'd stand out for a nice bit of a cuddle in the cinema, wouldn't you, Miss Islesborough? Do we need to go into all this? Harold demanded plaintively. And with the voicing of the question, the car drew up before the front door of Rutherford Hall, and they all got out. And that's it for Chapter 7. Doggone, I didn't bring my drink in here again. I have not had a coffee or tea yet. What's wrong with me? That's all 7. I think I just said that. So we go on to 8, Part 1. On entering the library, Mr. Wimborne blinked a little as his shrewd old eyes went past Inspector Bacon, whom he had already met, to the fair-haired, good-looking man beyond him. Inspector Bacon performed introductions. This is Detective Inspector Craddock of New Scotland Yard, he said. New Scotland Yard? Mr. Wimborne's eyebrows rose. Dermot Craddock, who had a pleasant manner, went easily into speech. We have been called in on the case, Mr. Wimborne, he said. As you are representing the Crackenthorpe family, I feel it's only fair that we should give you a little confidential information. Nobody could make a better show of presenting a very small portion of the truth and implying that it was the whole truth than Inspector Craddock. Inspector Bacon will agree, I'm sure," he added, glancing at his colleague. Inspector Bacon agreed with all due solemnity, and not at all as though the whole matter were prearranged. "It's like this," said Craddock. "We have reason to believe, from information that has come into our possession, that the dead woman is not a native of these parts, that she traveled down here from London, and that she had recently come from abroad, probably, though we're not sure of that, from France." Mr. Wimborne again raised his eyebrows. "Indeed," he said, "indeed." "That being the case," explained Inspector Bacon, "the chief constable felt that the Yard was better fitted to investigate the matter." "I can only hope," said Mr. Wimborne, "that the case will be solved quickly. As you can no doubt appreciate, the whole business has been a source of much distress to the family. Although not personally concerned in any way, they are." He paused for a bare second, but Inspector Craddock filled the gap quickly. "It's not a pleasant thing to find a murdered woman on your property. I couldn't agree with you more. Now I should like to have a brief interview with the various members of the family. I really cannot see what they can tell me. Probably nothing of interest, but one never knows. I dare say I can get most of the information I want from you, sir. Information about this house and the family." "And what can that possibly have to do with an unknown young woman coming from abroad and getting herself killed here?" "Well, that's rather the point," said Craddock. "Why did she come here? Had she once had some connection with this house? Had she been, for instance, a servant here at one time, a lady's maid perhaps? Or did she come here to meet a former occupant of Rutherford Hall?" Mr. Wimborne said coldly that Rutherford Hall had been occupied by the Crackenthorpes ever since Josiah Crackenthorpe built it in 1884. "That's interesting in itself," said Craddock. "If you'd just give me a brief outline of the family history." Mr. Wimborne shrugged his shoulders. "There's very little to tell. Josiah Crackenthorpe was a manufacturer of sweet and savory biscuits, relishes, pickles, etc. He accumulated a vast fortune. He built this house. Luther Crackenthorpe, his eldest son, lives here now." "Any other sons?" "One other son, Henry, who was killed in a motor accident in 1911. "And the present Mr. Crackenthorpe has never thought of selling the house?" "He is unable to do so," said the lawyer dryly, "by the terms of his father's will." "Perhaps you'll tell me about the will?" "Why should I?" Inspector Craddock smiled. "Because I can look it up myself if I want to, at Somerset House." Against his will, Mr. Wimborne gave a crabbed little smile. "Quite right, Inspector. I was merely protesting that the information you ask for is quite irrelevant. As to Josiah Crackenthorpe's will, there's no mystery about it. He left his very considerable fortune in trust, the income from it to be paid to his son Luther for life, and after Luther's death the capital to be divided equally between Luther's children, Edmund, Cedric, Harold, Alfred, Emma, and Edith. Edmund was killed in the war, and Edith died 4 years ago, so that on Luther Crackenthorpe's decease, the money will be divided between Cedric, Harold, Alfred, Emma, and Edith's son, Alexander Eastleigh." "And the house?" "That will go to Luther Crackenthorpe's eldest surviving son, or his issue." "Was Edmund Crackenthorpe married?" "No." "So the property will actually go to the next son, Cedric. Mr. Luther Crackenthorpe himself cannot dispose of it?" "No." "And he has no control of the capital?" "No." "Isn't that rather unusual?" "I suppose," said Inspector Craddock shrewdly, "that his father didn't like him." "You suppose correctly," said Mr. Wimborne. Old Josiah was disappointed that his eldest son showed no interest in the family business, or indeed in business of any kind. Luther spent his time traveling abroad and collecting objects d'art. Old Josiah was very unsympathetic to that kind of thing, so he left his money in trust for the next generation. But in the meantime, the next generation have no income except what they make or what their father allows them. And their father has a considerable income but no power of disposal of the capital. Exactly. And what all this has to do with the murder of an unknown young woman of foreign origin, I cannot imagine. It doesn't seem to have anything to do with it, Inspector Craddock agreed promptly. I just wanted to ascertain all the facts. Mr. Wimborne looked at him sharply, then, seemingly satisfied with the result of his scrutiny, rose to his feet. "I'm proposing now to return to London," he said, "unless there's anything further you wish to know." He looked from one man to the other. "No, thank you, sir." The sound of the gong rose fortissimo from the hall outside. "Dear me," said Mr. Wimborne, "one of the boys, I think, must have been performing." Inspector Craddock raised his voice to be heard above the clamor as he said, "We'll leave the family to have lunch in peace, but Inspector Bacon and I would like to return after, say, at 2:15, and have a short interview with every member of the family." "You think that's necessary?" "Well," Craddock shrugged his shoulders, "it's just an off chance somebody might remember something that would give us a clue to the woman's identity." "I doubt it, Inspector. I doubt it very much, but I wish you good luck. As I said just now, the sooner this distasteful business is cleared up, the better for everybody." Shaking his head, he went slowly out of the room. And I'll stop there. And that's, chapter 8, part 2. Sorry about the live today, but my Florida kids were here, and they've gone to spend some more time with my girl's dad, my ex, so I'll see him again tomorrow, but they'll be leaving before my live. I'm pretty sure. I love my children. Of course, that's terrible. I'd rather say, y'all are family too, but y'all know what I mean. So we'll see about tomorrow, but I'm pretty sure I'll be live. Love y'all. Be sweet. Don't be ugly. See ya.